Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you very much for joining us today for our special session on PSR and employment supports as a discussion panel with some local experts, local-ish, I guess, local to BC, I should say, which will give you a preview of who we're going to be seeing. You'll know that today is the concluding segment of our six-part series on PSR and employment supports across a range of topics, and we are very grateful to all the presenters who've spoken on the topics across the six series, having taken place about over the period of about a month and a half or so. If you haven't yet done so, I just encourage you to adjust your volume to a comfortable level. We're going to be doing this in a different way, as I did mention, so we might have a couple kinks, a little bit of sort of bugs to fix as we go through, but we are very happy to adjust as is appropriate. So, just a quick intro for those who have never been on a session before with us. Who is behind the PSR Advanced Practice? Jordan Clark provides technology support, IT, in around the psyrehab.ca website and the establishment of our webinar platform here. So to him, we're very grateful. My name is Matthew Lang. I work with the PSR AP in a coordinator capacity. Dr. John Higginbottom, who is the founder of the PSR programs at Douglas, the post-degree diploma program, as well as the advanced practice itself. And Dr. Regina Casey, who is the program manager for the PSR Advanced Practice and currently the coordinator for the post-degree diploma at Douglas. What is the Advanced Practice? What are we here to do? Well, primarily the overall Advanced Practice is funded by the Ministry of Health in order to provide leadership, education, and guidance to the mental health field to develop and put into place effective, evidence-based psychosocial rehabilitation practices. Again, we thank all the instructors in this series and in our other series who have lent their expertise, their time, and their generosity to the ongoing efforts of the project. If you haven't yet done so, if this is your first session with us or one of your early sessions with us, I'd encourage you to visit our website, www.psyrehab.ca, and click on the workshops link. Scrolling to the bottom, you'll see an archive webinars section, which includes every single session that we've run to date, starting January of 2014. So that's upwards of 30 different topic-based, high-quality webinars you can review for free. The slide decks are connected to each of the archives, as are the videos of the session and any supporting materials. The purpose of the advanced practice is to support clinicians and managers responsible for providing PSR services through different ways, by transferring evidence-based knowledge, providing expert clinical consultation, providing training and education events, developing website resources, and supporting the Provincial Advisory Committee and the PSR Community of Practice. You may be more familiar with some points like transferring of evidence-based knowledge through our webinar platform and through the developing of website resources. If you're not familiar with our clinical consultation capacity or the direct trainings and education events, I'd encourage you to get in contact with us through the website. In so doing, we'll be able to ask a little bit more about opportunities to access those resources. We just wanted to acknowledge the funding for this portion of the project. The employment series is provided by the Ministry of Advanced Education through a $50,000 grant that supports the development of the materials and the gracious compensation of our hosts and guests, as well as the tech maintenance. A quick aside for folks who have a connection to persons with lived experience of hearing voices, or for folks who are persons with the lived experience of hearing voices, there is a research project going on right now conducted through UBC Occupational Therapy. This is the poster for it, which is also available on our website. The primary contact I would direct your attention to is Dr. Michael Lee at the UBC School of Occupational Sciences and Occupational Therapy. So if you have an opportunity to connect via Michael Lee if you are interested in participating in the project or just want to learn a little bit more. And again, reflecting back on our series, today is our last one. We are so grateful to have had you with us if you were with us, and we're grateful to have you with us today if it's your first session. Again, all these other sessions are on the website now. You can go back and look if you're interested in social enterprise, or if you're interested in the intersection of mental health and workplace law, or IPS in its more robust discussion from our session earlier on March 4th with Lana, Catherine, and Kieran, as well as our illustrious presenter, Chris Arnold, offered us 2 sessions, our introductory session, helping people get and keep jobs, and the follow-up positive behaviors in employment from last series. So without further ado, I will introduce our panelists. We have 2 folks with us today who are going to be speaking briefly to the sort of summary of their discussions they've had earlier in the series, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions. So the first of our 2 guests is Chris Arnold, coming back once again, and we're so grateful to have Chris with us. Chris has a Master's of Science degree in psychology, is a master-level trainer in the Nonviolent Crisis Intervention Program, and is the clinical director of the Provincial Networking Group Incorporated, otherwise known as PNGI. I encourage you to check out their website for services and resources abundant. He's also a psychology professor with the Northwest Community College and has been working in the field of disability services for over 25 years. Chris managed one of the most successful supported employment agencies in BC for over 18 years and is regularly asked to teach and mentor in the area of specialized employment services for people with disabilities. Chris recently became the first person in Canada to receive the Certified Employment Support Professional designation from US-based accrediting body APSE. Chris joined the Douglas College team as an instructor in the newly advanced certificate program, Employment Support Specialty, and if you want to learn more about that, I'm sure you can email us or Chris himself. Our other wonderful guest is Lana Cullis, coming to us from the Fraser region right now and sometimes in Vancouver Coastal Health, so she's all over in health in the Lower Mainland extent. Lana has worked as a change advocate with both individuals and agencies for over 20 years. She has 11 years specialization in helping persons who have significant life challenges to enter and maintain employment. Currently, Lana is working with the Canadian Mental Health Association Vancouver Fraser branch in order to provide one-to-one vocational supports to youth aged 18 to 30 on the EPI teams in Fraser. She is a seasoned practitioner of the Dartmouth Individual Placement and Support Model. Lana has a BA in English and Psychology and is a registered rehab professional. She believes that participant voice is the most vital form of continuing education in the mental health field, and we are grateful to her for that perspective and agree. So we will switch over now to Chris, who's going to offer us an introductory discussion on sort of just a review of the content he touched on from our earlier 2 sessions, in fact. We're going to do the same with Lana, who's going to present another summary of her material, and then we're going to open up the floor for discussion, taking questions as they arise. So give me 2 seconds, and I'm going to switch over to Chris's summary slide deck. This is what and Chris, I'll create a video window in 1 sec. Can folks hear okay right now? Hi, Chris.
Hey, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, I'll turn it over to you without further ado.
All right, thanks, Matt. I'm happy to be here today in the final session on this webinar series, and along with Matt and Lana, it's great to be able to chat with people, and it's great to be able to answer questions and have more designated time specifically to that. So hopefully you have thought of a few great questions for us. And what I thought I'd do first off is just go through sort of a summary outline, highlights, if you will, of some of the areas that I've spoken about in previous webinars. And I was just trying to think of a way to bring together a number of points that were brought up and that I shared from our experience. And so it kind of came together in something I called the 7 keys to highly effective employment supports. There seemed to, simply because as I was writing my list in preparation for this, it sort of seemed to fall into 7 main areas that I thought would be good to review. So I'll go through those. As I'm going through them, questions may pop into your head. You can go ahead and type those questions in. or save them until we actually call for the questions in just a little bit. This won't be long. It's only really this one slide with the 7 points. And so I wanted to just get started with that. I'm in my home office today, so I should put in a bit of a disclaimer that I share my home with two Dobermans and 4 large parrots. And the parrots and the dogs can be noisy at times. The dogs are outside enjoying the sunshine, but if you hear any squawking in the background, that's just going to be the birds. So going back to the 7 keys of highly effective employment supports, these are sort of 7 main areas that I like to highlight a lot when I'm talking about the types of specialized employment that can be beneficial for people that have various barriers to employment. So the first one is probably always starting off with the idea of individualized supports being key. I think that most of the really successful models, and there's a number of different models that can work well in helping people become employed, but I think the ones that we see the most success from for people with barriers or multiple barriers to employment are those that have a very strong individualized component. And so really focusing on sort of that one-on-one involvement, working with people, getting to know people, the types of employment supports or the direction that we go in is really dictated by what their individual needs or strengths and their environment sort of dictates. They're looking at that from that perspective, really understanding that there isn't necessarily one cookie cutter type of approach for employment supports. It's not just one model or a form or a questionnaire that you can pull out that's going to work for everyone. And so it's sort of a bigger picture than that, and the individual issues really guide which direction you go, how you proceed. And in fact, sometimes and often I would say we, as employment support providers, we can be very surprised in some cases where our assumptions about a person on their first contact with us may end up not being accurate as we really get into that individualized support model. The second one is a thorough and comprehensive discovery. Now, discovery is a term that's often associated with the customized employment support model, but you can use whatever term you would as far as it's basically your intake process. When a new job seeker comes to you for supports, that initial process that you go through in order to get to know them, their skills, their strengths, their needs, that needs to be as comprehensive as possible. And in fact, we need to really focus a lot of efforts and energies into making that stage of the job development process very comprehensive, because that's really where we're going to learn all of the things that will either help us or hinder us, and help or hinder the person that we're supporting. The more we can learn right at the start before we actually get moving people into employment, the better it's going to be for both us and them. We can avoid a lot of potential pitfalls and issues if we make sure that we've done a thorough and comprehensive intake or discovery process right in the beginning. This is where, when we talk about, I talk a lot about success stories, but I also talk about horror stories, or the times that things didn't work out. And in so many of those cases where something went wrong, we can very often trace it back to something that was missed at those very early stages, or an area where maybe we went through a part too quickly. And so we didn't actually have the opportunity to identify and then prepare for some of those things that might come up later on. The third one was understanding disability and mental health related issues. As an employment support person, we need to know as much as we can about employment supports, but because of the folks that we're supporting, we also need to have a good understanding of either disability or mental health related issues. So my initial industry or area is in the disability community, and so looking at things like, for example, somebody who has FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, or autism spectrum disorders, or even a learning disability or attention deficit disorder. Those are each one of those areas comes with its own specific issues, traits, needs, that sort of thing. So we really do need to sort of become people with multiple hats and sort of experts in many different parts and things. I think that also applies in the mental health field. You know, there's a number of different areas relating to mental health that we really need to sort of become experts on or educate ourselves on, so that we can truly understand some of the things that the person, the job seeker that we're supporting, might be dealing with when it comes to employment and the workplace. Number 4 is that it takes a team, and it really does take a team in order to be successful, I believe, in helping somebody that has multiple barriers to employment. The employment support person is, of course, a key and probably the lead in many of those teams. However, there's so many other parts, and what we've found in our experience is that if you try to convince or recruit or engage those other people after the fact, it's much more difficult. It's a lot easier to get, you know, a key person, whether it's a social worker, a doctor, a probation officer, a mental health clinician, a family member. If you can get them engaged in the idea of they have a role in the employment support process as part of that team. If you can engage them early, it makes it much easier when you need to call on them or ask them for some inputs or supports later on down the road. Using a business approach is something that I advocate for all the time when it comes to employment, and especially specialized employment services. A lot of times, from our own experience, we realized that these individuals that we were supporting could have very complex situations, and a lot of times those traditional employment supports or methods just weren't working, and that's why they were coming to us. And so in order to provide a more specialized support, we really early started focusing on using a business approach. So we came up with a lot of non-traditional strategies that really focused on not a sort of a charitable or a social servicey kind of approach, but really looking at talking the talk of the business people that are hiring individuals. Really getting down to looking at what are some of the issues that businesses are dealing with within a workplace, and how could somebody on our job seeker list help them meet those needs through writing a proposal, for example, instead of just applying on a job. One of the things that we often try to do is take the job seeker that we're supporting out of the typical lineup of applicants for a job. And you can do that by using some business approaches or non-traditional approaches. And so things like we use profiles instead of resumes. We write job proposals instead of applying on jobs with people. And so those kinds of things have been extremely successful for us. And I think a big part of that is because it's helped to take our job seeker out of the typical lineup. And so that's a big advantage, or can be. When you look at the number 6, follow-up supports are absolutely necessary. We need to not hope that we've done a good enough job that we can sort of step out or fade out and then we're finished or complete. I think we need to understand that follow-up supports have to be built into any successful employment support program. And those supports we can't necessarily stick a specific timeline on them, because that does, being an individualized support service, that can sometimes depend on who it is that we're supporting, the workplace, and that sort of thing. There's many factors that can come into play. But being available to come in on a follow-up basis, and that may be on short notice, can be really crucial to helping to maintain retention of these jobs that are being developed. And then finally, number 7 is looking at the celebrating success. And I don't think that we're good at doing this, but I think that we often do good work quietly, and we're so busy that we go from one person to the next, and we don't necessarily take the time to actually intentionally celebrate success in the work that we do. I think that there's some really good reasons to celebrate success, and even putting some resources into that and some time and staff time and effort into these activities. First of all, celebrating success is great PR. When you talk about public relations, when you talk about promoting the concept of employment for people with all kinds of abilities, telling success stories, and having those testimonials from employers, from employees, can be a very strong benefit as far as PR goes. But also it can help to educate people, in the community, whether it's the business community, but even sometimes individuals themselves or their families who don't really have a real confident picture or idea of the variety and types of jobs that are out there. And some of the different success stories can just really help inspire people or open people's minds to think of the potential or the possibilities, whether it's, like I said, a family member or an employer or individuals themselves. So I think that all of those parts are really important. I'm just looking down at the questions list. We had a couple of them. One question from Victor was about, are we referring to psychological assessments or development of self-awareness? I think that the assessment, there's a number of different assessments that can be used, and I think that many of the assessment tools that are out there, if you have access to them, can be helpful with an employment spin. Or an employment lens. So certainly psychosocial assessments can be very helpful, but sometimes the assessment might be from an occupational therapist or from someone like that. You might do an informal assessment around just interests and different directions that the person might be interested in. So there's a number of different levels, I think, of assessment that can be helpful. I always think that more information is beneficial, it's helpful. So pulling from all of those areas, I think, is a good idea. There was also, Samantha asked if we have examples of profiles that that you could have access to use with your own clients. I do have examples. I think I'll double check and see if we've posted any of those in previous ones. But if not, you can certainly email me and I can send you some information.
Yeah, Chris, I do think we have them on the earlier sessions regarding discovery as well as job profile development and stuff from our first session. We might be able to do a little package that we can then attach to this archived webinar as well.
Sure.
So maybe we'll take the question from Julie, if that's okay, and then we're going to shift over and we'll ask Alana to present her summary findings, and then we'll open up.
So Julie asked about, as a person with lived experience, vision issues, and arthritis, what can I do to help a prospective employer with my needs in the workplace? I think that I always like to be able to tackle it from sort of a strengths-based approach. And so looking at, usually what we would do with employers is we would do research into the benefits. So what benefits could you bring? What problems could you solve for an employer? And if you can do some of that research and find some specific benefits, one of the lines that I often use with my team is, any employer will hire any employee that brings more cost, that brings more value than cost. And so our job is to try to show an employer how you could bring more value to their business than cost. You could solve a problem or an issue that currently exists within their business. If you can take that approach, employers are much more open, I find, to then saying, okay, this is what I can do for you. This is a problem I can solve for you. And because of my vision issues or arthritis, these are some workarounds or accommodations that would be helpful or that I might need from you. I think if we can first talk to them about the benefits that you can bring to their business and the value, then you can insert the other things or needs or accommodations or supports sort of as a secondary part to that conversation. Because if we start with that, sometimes I think people's doors close or minds close. And so we like to use that sort of benefit, cost-benefit business type of approach right at the start.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, so we'll switch over now and check in with Lana. Give me 2 seconds to do that. Next slide. Alrighty, so in front of you is the lovely Lana, and so Lana's going to walk us through the summary of the IPS employment content from our earlier sessions. And same as with Chris, feel free to type your questions as they come in. Lana's able to see them on the screen that we have in front of us here today. We're at Douglas College in New Westminster, in case anyone is wondering. So we have a little bit of added, pizzazz in the environment. Not our regular beautiful living room dinette at Dr. Casey's house. And Dr. Casey does send her regrets for being unable to attend with us today. She's in Ireland. So we'll get started. Go ahead, Lana. Thank you.
So yeah, thanks for having me, and it was really nice to see all the art in the other room there too as well. I'm going to be talking about psychosis, substance use, and youth, and some of the employment supports that we provide with the individual placement and support model. And I'm capturing a bit of what I talked about last time with my partner Catherine, and also with a person who was really successful in getting employment, Kyron, who was featured last time. So the three kind of main things that I want to highlight this time, sort of the 3 points that I'll highlight from last time are: first, that youth really come into our services wanting to work. And if we look at the literature, we know specifically that about 78% of youth with psychosis are coming in and they're already primed to be working. And so this is like really super good news. They already want to find jobs and they want help to do that. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind as we move forward this morning. The other thing that's really critical with this population as compared to older adults when we work with them with mental health difficulties is that youth are more likely to be using drugs. So this is something that you want to be aware of. And that's something I'm going to speak a little bit more to. And the other thing, that kind of theme that I want to keep in mind this morning is that the best practices evidence often goes against our natural desire that some people that in the employment field that we have, sometimes we can kind of have this innate kind of protective thing going on, that we don't want them to maybe work too fast, or we don't want them to have jobs that maybe we think might be too difficult or might set them back. But in reality, if we look at the evidence and if we listen to our clients, we know that work actually has a protective factor. And so these 3 statements or 3 themes that I've pulled out from our last webinar is what I'm going to be speaking to moving forward. Next slide, please. So some of the key things that help us moving forward with the IPS model in particular is that we have a zero exclusion principle that we work with. And it's kind of the bottom line. And so with persons that have substance use, there's no exclusion based on that factor. So when you have a youth coming into our program, whether or not they're using, how much they're using, what kind they're using, it doesn't prevent them from working with us and working towards their goal of finding a job. And so that's really, really important. The other thing is the principle of a rapid job search. Traditionally, what's happened in some employment services and with some mental health services is that people that are using substances are often discouraged from working. And this comes from the idea that they think that they're more at risk for relapse if we get them starting to work. And we know actually that if you get people involved in meaningful activity quickly, that actually promotes health, healing, and recovery. And so the IPS philosophy really incorporates, as a part of what we do with people, is building a tolerance to adverse risk experiences, work experiences. And so what we do is we right off the start, we're like, okay, let's apply for some jobs. You're probably not going to get them, but let's see what happens. You're going to learn how to apply for jobs. If you get offered a job and maybe if it doesn't work out, what can you learn from that? What did you like about that job? What was interesting about? Okay, let's go see. Let's see if we can find you something similar, and things like that. So right from the beginning, getting a job at all costs isn't the goal. It's learning how to take what you've learned and bring it along for the next experience. The other thing that we really work on is what Chris was speaking to, is the idea of learning about your illness or your symptoms, how that builds into your experience. Next slide, please. So what does support look like? Support looks like different things to different people, but with the IPS method, building hope with tangible supports is really important. So not having a wait list, having as soon as you say to yourself, I think I could work, having somebody there that can right away say, okay, let's do that. Let's get started. What are your goals? What are you interested in? And having there be no barrier to that. Once you have been working and maybe you've been out of, not been a work counselor for a while, being able to come back if you've lost your job and be re-intook into the program right away. That can to have hope be present in your journey. If you failed, you can just keep going and try again. The other thing that we do is we have time unlimited support with persons that are in the IPS program. So as long as you want it, you can have support with your jobs, and that support looks like what you'd like it to look like. If you don't want support, you don't have to have it, but if you want it, it's there as you need it. And our plans are person-centered. Chris spoke to that as well. So it looks differently for different people. I wanted to bring forward from the last one, the scaffolding, that metaphor. Next slide, please. So to think of the support that we have with IPS employment counseling, or any employment counseling really, is that it's temporary. You can see it, it's real, like the scaffolding on this building, but it only goes up when it's needed, and when it's not needed anymore, you take it away. And but the people that need those supports, they can really count on it for as long as they need it. But that the structure behind the scaffolding is real. That's the person themselves. You as the support shouldn't become more important than the person that you're supporting. And so that's an idea that I think is really central to how we want to be in a person's rehabilitation. We never want to be more important or more sturdy than what the person is developing for themselves. Next slide, please. So in terms of the substance use and some of the things that we were talking about last time that I wanted to highlight this time, it goes to, as a practitioner, if you are working with persons that have substance use as a part of their profile, you really want to know about substances, and you really want to know about how the person that you're working with is using those things. And you want to be really mindful of the fact that people are as diverse in how they use substances as they are in their diversity in their vocational goals and in their job hopes and their dreams and their experiences. So those two things come together, and it can be really complex, but it can also be really exciting. But it's an awareness that you really want to be mindful of as a practitioner. And so this goes again to be speaking to strengths and that strengths model. You really want to harness and utilize a person's self-knowledge about their drug use and to cultivate and bring that to the forefront so that moving forward, you can bring that in alignment with their other strengths and their with what they're looking for with their jobs, and you want to have a compatibility with those two things. And you have to somehow learn for yourself to be very comfortable to be talking with a person about what their drug use, when they use it, when they prefer not to, are they cutting down, not cutting down, do they want to cut down, and how do they put that figure into their job search, and how can you be of service with that? The other thing is to be really providing clear information about possible outcomes of their choices and how that's going to show up in the job market. So one example is I come up sometimes with young people that they've had a lot of car accidents or things happen because of impulsivity and drug use. And so with the person with the car accidents, I was working with a gentleman that wanted to be a delivery driver. He loves driving. And so he was wanting to, with our rapid job search, start applying for jobs right away in the driving industry. And so I was really wanting to encourage him with that, but then I was also explaining to him about what a driver's abstract was and about how employers look at driver's abstracts. And so it could be true that he's a good driver, but it's also true that he had a lot of accidents on his driver's abstract, and provided with the information about how he might have to speak to that in the job interview. Did he want us to practice how he was then and how he is now and how much time has passed and these kinds of things. So that was really good for him. He decided that he didn't think enough time had passed between his what he called irresponsible behavior and where he's doing now. But he thought that he could drive in the future, but not enough time had passed. Next slide, please. So, so things like continuous assessment with that young gentleman, I would check back with him in 6 months and see, do you want to maybe try some driving jobs now? Or should we do some disclosure with an employer? And maybe we might find one that would give a chance if he's doing well and with his doctor and things like that. Being willing to start and stop jobs. One of the things that we want to be conscious of with people with addiction and with psychosis is that sometimes jobs can be really stressful, and sometimes we might be wanting to be supporting a person to leave a job that's really not working for them. We want to help them to quit with dignity, to do that in a way that perhaps they can get a recommendation from that employer when they're leaving, and salvage the strength and what they've learned from that job and take that moving forward. And another thing is that we really want to use the services around us. So sometimes we might be in a place with a person where working just isn't the best thing to do right now, but maybe we could support them to work with the occupational therapist to doing volunteering, or maybe they're interested in going to a clubhouse. Maybe we could take them over there and make that introduction and show that we really honor the choices. Things like that, but always extend the invitation for them to come back at some point and change their mind. And the last kind of thing around this that I'd like to remind us about is to practice moment by moment engagement with people that are in these situations. When you have addiction and you have some kind of health situation happening for yourself, things change from day to day, sometimes from afternoon to morning, and hope is fleeting. But when you have it, sometimes you really want to get going. So us as practitioners, sometimes we get attached to a plan that we might have put a lot of work into it. We might have connected with employers or with other workers or something like that. Sometimes we just need to really go with where our person is in that moment, move forward, change directions, and just take it as it comes. And that's what our people are doing from us. And when Regina and Matthew invited me to come back today, they said, had you had any new reflections since the webinar last time? And one of the reflections that I've had having the opportunity to watch some of the other webinars on the series is the importance of this interagency cooperation And I kind of thought of the scaffolding metaphor, and I think of all the other practitioners that are out there that use different methods, different theories, and all of this kind of thing for how we work together. And I thought of this, how long some of our clients are in services from one service to another. And I have one person right now who is like in her 3rd year of employment services. And so one of the things that I thought of is how we can empower that person to have a consistent thread of belief in herself as she goes from service to service. So she's worked with me. She's been in a supported employment situation. She's been successful there, but it's not a good fit for the kind of work she's doing. That supported employment service is now supporting her to go work with a different supported employment service, and they're making all the phone calls and they're taking her and doing the introductions, but they need Work BC funding. And so all of us are all working together, and she's getting a consistent message through that you can work and that the systems aren't a barrier to her working. And so I'm really excited by that, because a few years ago, I think in this industry, it was a bit more competitive, and we weren't always encouraged to work like that. And the other piece for this woman is that her independence is really being fostered. I did bus training with her rather than drive her to places. And there's a peer support worker being involved to take her to Work BC. So at every level, her independence to the level that she can tolerate it is being fostered. And that's only going to serve her to be successful eventually when she's in employment. So that's just something that's really important, that no matter where we are, we can work together, interagency to scaffold a person to continue on their work journey. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. That's a fantastic overview. I really appreciate you coming as well with the new reflections and specifically in the way that it connects to our complex and interconnected systemic world. There's a couple questions. One comes first from from Victor, who says, would you say that finding and keeping a job helps individuals to manage their substance use? I'll ask you to speak up.
Absolutely. Both from the persons that I work with, sharing that information with me, and also from the literature review. In preparing for the last webinar that I did a literature review of about 40 studies that have been done in the last 5 to 6 years. And all of them came to this similar conclusion, and a number of those studies I put at the end of that last webinar. And there was a couple of themes with that. One is that one main conclusion was that with younger persons, that the act of even looking for a job sort of puts in stasis substance use. So it doesn't necessarily decrease substance use at first, but it helps it with a holding pattern. Another set of studies shows that persons that have a single substance that they use have the quickest recovery and are the ones that find it the easiest to respond to programs like ours and other employment supports. So if you are working with a person and they are a single substance user, as in alcohol or marijuana, are the two that are quoted most in the literature, those persons, if you can provide an early intervention to them, that is going to have the quickest response amongst those people, and it has the strongest ability to prevent those persons from becoming multiple substance users. And that's really exciting to know as employment professionals, the impact that we can have for persons that are using. And then, well, I could go on and on and on, but the short answer is yes, absolutely. And
Samantha has a question regarding your example. Specifically, is that employer aware? And maybe you can comment a little bit, Lana, on circumstances of disclosure, particularly around substance use issues.
So the model that we use, individual placement and support, is very respectful of the individual's choice to choose and disclose, and also that's consistent with what a person's rights are. A person has the right to disclose or not disclose, so that's important to know. So with disclosure, kind of how we go about it is you only really want to disclose if it's to your benefit to disclose. And so with alcohol addictions or drug addictions, often what happens is disclosure happens after the fact when there's been an incident is one of the times when disclosure happens. And the work that we end up doing as vocational counselors is to go in. Oh, I lost the thing on that. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
We end up going in and trying to do repair work afterwards. With persons with mental health specifics, when they want to disclose, usually it's because they want some kind of accommodation. And in that case, I would echo what Chris has said, is to be very cognizant about why are you disclosing? Are you disclosing because you are wanting the employer to participate with you in some kind of needs that you have in the work site? I have never really gone into an employer and just said, this person has an addiction. There's not really any reason to do that. So you have to be really clear about what it is that you expect from in terms of addiction. There are some people who are very open about their addictions and where they are, and usually those people are further along in their recovery journey. Like there are some people that have a fair amount of pride around their recovery. For instance, persons that are in AA or something like that. Sometimes they are more out and wanting to be talking about that, but those aren't usually situations where
Okay, Elizabeth, I see your question, and we will address it shortly. I'm just going to switch our format so we can see Chris's face and see a bit more of the questions. So perhaps whenever you're ready, Chris, feel free to jump on there. We can have both mics on at the same time. I'm not totally sure how we're going to navigate asking questions. I think maybe when folks ask questions from here on out, now they can be open questions to either panelist, or they can be directed to a specific topic area. If you don't mind just typing at the outset of your question, if there is a specific panelist who you're posing your question to, that would be great, and that would help us stay a little bit organized. Hope folks got the email on Monday asking to come with some prepared questions, so we're going to use the latter half of our day to answer some of those questions now. And then the only other question is, if people are very comfortable and confident and would like to pose their question using their microphone, I would ask that you digitally or virtually raise your hand, and you're going to notice a symbol at the top of your screen. It's the fourth one in from the left. It goes speaker, microphone, camera, and then raise hand. And if you raise your hand, it will be indicated to me, and I'll know that you would like to ask a question via your microphone. We're going to try this new technology integrating voice with our valuable community of practice audience. Just need to enable your microphone. And so you raising your hand will notify me that you'd like to do that. And I'll try and keep it as fair as possible in terms of order of questions. So from here forward, I'm going to offer Elizabeth's question to Lana. And then any questions that folks feel they'd like to ask, feel free to type in or raise your hand, like I said, and I'll do my very best to moderate them and keep them in order and posed to the panelists. So Elizabeth asks, how are you building interagency cooperation in your particular region? In fact, maybe I'll ask Lana this question first, but then also ask Chris if he'd like to comment as well.
Sure. So two things come to mind. One is around what Chris had said around celebrating success stories. So right now I'm having something I've called it work parties, and feel free to steal the title, anybody that's doing it. So what we're doing was clients that are currently working, we're getting together by geographical area, and we're having, pizza and whatever. So after work, it's going to be from 6 to 8 o'clock at night. And so clients are coming, and it's a bit structured, and we're going to be introducing ourselves to each other, and then there's sort of 3 kind of periods of time, but a chance to talk about jobs that you've liked in the past, your job that you have now, and then the last section will be how have you been successful at keeping work with whatever situation it is that you're living with. So it's not going to be so pointed as to force people to talk about mental health issues, because frankly, some of us that have diagnoses, that's relevant in our daily life, and some of us is like, well, I have a label, but I don't really want to talk about it. So whatever it is that people feel is keeping them successful with work, they can talk about that. Now, ideally, what would be really awesome, and in the main planning of these work parties, would be to invite people that are work curious to come and hear these stories. And that's the way that ultimately, for what we call our fidelity, we should have these. Because I'm part of a research project, there's some reasons why we're not having the work curious. But how that's interagency cooperation is because they're being hosted in. One's being hosted in a clubhouse, and we're inviting some of the working clients that used to be in our FE programs and are now attending clubhouses to come and join and mix. And there's cooperation there. And then the other one's being hosted by Van City. And so we're working with, whatever local site we can get. We want to be out of the hospital, out of the medical health center, and into the community and integrating. So that's an example of some areas where we're cooperating and working. And a completely different example is I worked earlier with a person who's a Syrian refugee, and they have some challenges around their literacy and their ability to understand English, but they're really committed to wanting to work. So Douglas College has a TAOS testing and support for helping people move forward, and then that's funded by Work BC. So the Douglas College person, the Work BC person, and myself, we all work together to support this person to get a paid placement, improving their English, and to help them go with that program and to move out of my program because they really needed English support to be successful. And so, yeah, we just did what it took. And the Work BC was phenomenal. They got the proposal together from one day to the next, and the person started the next week this project, the program. It was amazing, absolutely.
That's fantastic. Chris, any thoughts on interagency cooperation?
Yeah, I have. I've heard of a few cases where, or a few examples where agencies have been able to sort of start that process of working together, even from something just as simple as training or networking events. And so it takes one or two of the agencies to sort of put it out there, start the lead or host. But by inviting, you kind of grow some momentum. And so, for example, like a pooling resources just to do a training or networking event can be the start of what then ends up being a group of people that now they know each other, they see that they have some common situations, some common focus or efforts, and that there are areas where it's not going to be threatening for them to be able to work together and cooperate as opposed to seeing it as more competitive. So I think that there's been, I'm aware of groups, different kinds of groups, for example, on the island, in the Fraser Valley, a few of those areas where these networking training sort of opportunities have come up. Sometimes they've spun off then into celebrating success in the form of maybe an advertising or a community awareness or business awareness campaign where groups of agencies got together and worked on doing a series in their local newspaper on success stories and that sort of thing. or doing an event that welcomes in employers, like a luncheon or things like that. That can be a little bit daunting for one agency. Many agencies have, 1, 2, or 3 employment people in them. And so really strength in numbers can help by doing some events where now you have more hands to be able to help out, more ideas, things like that. So I think those are great examples of where if somebody can get that ball rolling, then you have the opportunity for it to build its own momentum, and pretty soon you now have a network that you're calling on for other ideas. Especially when that first effort goes off successfully, I think that can really get people tuned into the value of working together. Being from a northern rural community, that can be challenging because we can't physically meet and get together as easily. But I think through some of the virtual platforms and email groups and things like that, I think that we really can start to connect a bit better. I mean, I know even just from these webinar series, I've had a number of people contact me just through email afterwards, just asking questions or networking or things like that. So I think that there's lots of potential out there, and I think there's a few ideas we can already look at.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. A really cool question coming in from Victor. I'm not totally sure who would like to take the first stab at it, but Victor says, first he says, I'm at a library, which I find very fun. Victor's small business helps kids as young as 7 with special needs, primarily with developmental disabilities. And Victor would like to know, how best can he go about helping them get started on learning so that they'll be employable when they are young adults? Who would like to take the first step?
Well, the thought that went through my head was to cultivate what they love, to really I mean, 7 is really young, so to help them develop confidence in their passion and what they're curious about and what they really love, and to help that thrive as much as possible. My 2 adopted children, both have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and they're both very different from each other, and they both have things that they really like, and they were actually very evident when they were young. My son was a Lego master, and when he had his assessments and tests, he was quite gifted in the spatial mechanical things and all the formal ways that you assess that. But my mother-in-law said, well, we didn't need a test to tell us that. The Lego was there. And what he does now for his career is that he details cars. And he's amazing at taking apart all the little parts and making them perfect and putting them back. And he's got a real eye for details. And he loves cars. Which he also loved at a young age too. His first word was truck. So besides, mama, dada, but his first other real word. So, and my daughter was always food and bake at a very young age. We really encouraged that. And she's just gotten her first job 3 weeks ago. And she applied for other jobs, and she did have 2 practicums, or what they call them in high school, placements with her school program, but in different areas. But she got hired in a bakery decorating cakes, and she got that job herself, and she's doing okay with that. So I really believe in that wisdom of cultivating strengths and cultivating that from a young age. Both as a professional and as a mom of youth with special needs.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah, I think that there's. I love the idea of that too young to start. So yeah, 7 is very young, but I mean at the same time, it depends on the child. When we think about just in the world of famous entrepreneurs, these are the kids that had the lemonade stands and or sold something. And so I certainly think that it's not too young. And in fact, one of the dilemmas that can happen is that sometimes adult services may kick in too late. and there's a real lag, because what happens if people aren't successful in school? They sometimes those initiatives, I think, need to start earlier. And so certainly, a few of the things that I was just jotting down that I think would be very helpful for young kids, teenagers, that sort of thing. I mean, certainly volunteering is one idea that you can look at, and encouraging people to volunteer. Even just the idea of service projects, and not necessarily volunteer work, but just being of service in their community or to other people. What that really does is it builds networks. And I think that some of the more the great examples that I've heard of young people coming up, even with multiple barriers to employment, that seemed to almost have a real good upper hand in the employment world, were these kids whose parents were really actively networking, building networks with them, making sure that people in their communities knew them, making sure that they had other people in the community outside of the home, outside of school, that they knew, making sure that they had those connections, because each one of those connections is a potential future opportunity when it comes to employment and job creation. And so I think that just keeping the idea of networking, and maybe even starting to teach that to kids and young adults, the value of the seeds that you plant early for later on in life. Also, a big area we know in the disability community for sure is that a lot of times the challenges that come into play for maintaining work, a lot of times people lose jobs not necessarily because of their skill, but because of issues around social or communication issues that come up. So I think that with young kids starting at a young age, the more social practice they can have, the more opportunities they can have to interact with different types of people, to build their social skills, to work on communication if communication is an issue, which often in many cases and with many disabilities, there is an aspect of that. So even at a young age, any activities or opportunities that we can get people involved in that will help build both social and communication skills, it's going to put them on an upper a foot forward as far as employment. I just think it will be a real benefit. And so even if they're not all, doesn't mean they have to be out getting paid summer jobs or that sort of thing, although that's great. But some of those other areas around networking, being of service, social skills and communication skills could give them a real benefit when it comes to employment.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Our next question comes in from Charles. Really cool question around social enterprise and some of these, consider it to navigate ideas between skills training, job prep, and a job placement. So Charles says, as a social enterprise, we get clients referred to our agency for employment skills training. We're working on moving towards more of a hybrid program that incorporates skills training and job placement. One of the challenges faced is that they have a large number of people on the wait list, which stretches up to now about a year, and can only accommodate a few at a time. So Charles is looking for any suggestions. I presume this is a question on suggestions as to how to reduce the wait time, perhaps, but with the qualifier that quick placements is not the answer that Charles is looking for. So maybe I will direct this question first to Lana, and then Chris as well, if you have any ideas.
I'm just wanting to be clear about what you mean by quick placement. What went through my, while you clarify that, is that this is a really complex question. At CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association in Vancouver, we've had quite a steep learning curve about social purpose enterprise. We have a cafe called the Willow Bean Cafe, and we've learned some hard lessons on this one. Now we're in actually a little bit of a sweet spot, and the hard lessons that we've come from have been that we didn't fully understand when we first started the program that when persons, meaning the clients that come into the program, they come in thinking that it's a job, and they come in with the expectation that they've now been hired and they can stay. And no matter how many lovely ways that we as a program explain that it's for 6 months or it's for however long and then you have to find a new job, unless you do a really, really, really good, thorough job of clarifying that it's not a job, it's a training program, people don't do well when the time limit's up. And so we've gone through a couple of different reorganizations on how we do it. And so one of the things that, a couple of the things that we've learned from that is that it has to be called a training program and not a job. It has to have very short time limits, and that you do have to have a strong commitment almost as soon as people come in to finding them the next job or the next place where they're going to be. And also the criteria on how, disappeared again, on how people are selected for that program and what their needs are, and if there's any other way to be supporting them to find employment rather than your program, that's where those people probably should be. So if they can be in IPS programs, if they can be in Work BC, if they can be whatever. So what is it really that you are providing in your place? The other model that I've seen is if you are, what is your model? Like, are you a business or are you a supported employment program? And so if you're a business, and in the Fraser Valley, there's another business that I've seen operating, and they're a good business, but they've also fallen into that trap where they a social purpose enterprise, but they are operating a thriving business, and they've had employees come in and again stay, and they've had a very long term that they were allowed to stay, almost 2 years, I believe it was. And so now they're in the process of changing their model and working towards having a very clear training time, and then trying to get people out so that they can serve more people. But they actually had a really good business model, and so they went through a lot of thinking about, maybe we should stay a business and be a good employer and not be a social purpose enterprise training program, but actually just be a really good employer and be good to the people we have, and then through natural attrition, just be a great employer. But they've decided no, a social purpose enterprise that has a training component. So I think what you're wrestling with is hugely complex, and I would actually recommend. CMHA is really open to talking about what we've learned, and if you wanted to contact the CMHA Vancouver Burnaby branch, I'm sure they would be more than willing to talking to you about what's working and what's not working. And one of the things I can say in summary is that it's not something that you ever get high numbers of people. Sorry, I talked for too long.
I'm going to offer the CMHA Vancouver Burnaby, or I guess it's now Vancouver Fraser branch URL if folks are interested in connecting and learning more, particularly within the paradigms of programs like Willowbean. Just a quick follow-up from that program. Doug is interested in the compensation for trainees and employees at Willowbean. If that's
so
possible.
they get paid. I believe it's $12 an hour, but they get limited shifts. They only get one shift a week, so that it doesn't become what they're relying on as a form of employment. And it is training, and they get like their food safe and all of those kinds of things. But a significant portion of what they're getting is employment coaching to find their next job. And so that was the program I mentioned earlier that is helping the person I was working with move on to their next stage. And that's very different than how it was first started, where they had fewer participants who had a majority of shifts getting, working up to their, almost up to their allowance that you're allowed on PWD. So now there's more participants, but very, very limited a number of hours so that it doesn't psychologically become in a person's mind manageable, but they're getting the skills.
Chris, any comments on the tension between skill building and job placement, and then the idea that there's always going to be greater need than there are available services in one particular moment? So addressing waitlist issues as well.
Yeah, I think that I mean I would support a lot of what Lana was saying, and I think that from our experience with social enterprise and with micro businesses and those sorts of things, I mean we ran some in our early days as well, and we can sometimes be the victim of our own success in that we start this business and we have one or two job developers for our employment program, and we start it with very good intentions, but the business actually starts to go very well and gets very busy, and then it monopolizes the time of the limited staff we have. So they in fact now become, business operators essentially instead of employment developers and job developers. And so I think having with any social enterprise program or a training program, I think it's essential that we make sure that there's still staffing available for the back end, the exit, the helping people to move through to employment, and that process should start right at the very beginning. And with those time limits and things like that Lana mentioned, I think that we have to make sure that part still exists, and it doesn't sort of get all of the staff time doesn't get swallowed up into just the operation of the business. One area where we saw some success ourselves was we had when we had a business venture where the business was actually profitable to hire somebody to actually manage the business, and that wasn't our employment staff. And so our employment staff could still do the employment work and help people who were going to move through. But the revenue from the business could actually sustain a manager. And I think if we're looking at if it is a business, then it should be logical to expect that would happen eventually as well. So it can be a tricky situation. I certainly think that there's value in being able to have training opportunities for people, but I think that we always have to, keep in mind Stephen Covey's phrase of always begin with the end in mind, and think about how we're going to move people through, and not necessarily on a set time frame, but it's going to be quite individualized, but we still have to keep that in mind, I think.
Just something else that kind of came to mind too. The Hope Cafe is a social purpose enterprise that is in partnership with Lens, I believe it is, in North Vancouver. And it isn't exclusively for persons with mental illness, although those persons are given a kind of priority. And it's a blended cafe between, any competitive person that wants to work there. And then sometimes persons are hired that happen to have a mental illness as well. And the mission statement that is on the wall is a very inclusive statement. But the model that they're using there is a business model, and it's being very successful. Yes, lower numbers of persons are being hired, but they're working in an environment that more closely resembles what a truly competitive coffee shop would look like. And those persons, when they move on, are going to have skills that more closely resemble, a regular competitive type of employment. So that might be another place for people who are looking for resources or people to talk to about alternative models to go to for a resource. So that's the Hope Cafe, and there's actually quite a lot. Just if you Google that, they had a fair number of interviews and stuff like that through the media when they were first getting started, because it is just a little bit different. And Jill Walker is the occupational therapist that was very involved in getting that going.
So I've just thrown up the sort of quick profile that Blends published on the Hope Cafe when it first launched, I guess, maybe a year or so. Okay, we have a little bit of time left. I'd love to take a few more questions. If folks have questions prepared, feel free to copy paste in at this time. Maybe while we're waiting for anybody to throw a question out, I'm going to ask a contentious question of both our panelists. If, in your opinion, is there ever a time where it's not a good idea to pursue employment support with somebody who's interested in access? So maybe to Chris, and then we'll ask Lana. Ever a time not to work?
I think probably the main answer I would give to that is I think if the person is strongly indicating themselves that they're either not interested or they're not ready or something like that, I think that might be the main area where I would say we need to look a little bit deeper or spend a bit more time or have the person come back. I mean, there's been a few times where people came into our employment program because they were sent there by somebody, and that somebody might have been a service provider or it might have been a parent in a few cases who wanted them to get off the couch and get working. And when they came into our program, because our services are a bit different than traditional employment programs, they were basically putting the brakes on themselves and saying, I don't know if I need this, I don't know if I'm ready for this. And so we left the door open for them to come back, which is an important part of programs that Lana was mentioning. So I think that's the only time when I would say. Other than that, I think that we've seen far too many stories of people that had been sort of written off or deemed unemployable in older models that became employed and their life changed dramatically for the better. And so I like the idea of low barriers to access for employment supports.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. And Lana?
So I would wholeheartedly agree with what Chris said. That's the first thing, is if somebody themselves doesn't want it. And sometimes working on mental health teams, what we'll see is a case manager might make a referral and say so-and-so should be working, and make the referral, and then actually doesn't want to work. So that would be one. Another thought that I had is if a person is too agitated or in a state where, like I've only once this has happened for me, but somebody had a real anger problem, and I actually didn't feel safe being in the room with them, and I had to shut the session down. And they, by the next week, they still had that same kind of quality about their personhood. They weren't sorry for what happened the last week. They weren't acknowledging that they were really angry, and I had to let them know that until that there was some kind of a change, that I didn't feel comfortable working with them. And that's only once in my whole career that I've had that situation happen. So that would be a time where safety is at issue, where I would say. But again, I would always keep that door open for somebody to come back if there's change. And the only other kind of thing that kind of went through my mind around a provocative question like that might be around job match, but it's not around a person not working per se. So occasionally I've had somebody come in where they've had something in their background which should preclude them from, say, working. So if sometimes I work with people who are involved in forensics, and so there might be certain conditions, and so they might not agree with those conditions. And so maybe working with children might be something, or working with women if there's women or something, and they may not acknowledge what they've done, but it's part of my job to continually bring that up, that no, we won't be applying for those jobs, but how about these jobs over here? And so that might be an example that I could give.
I might I'm not seeing any new questions from the audience right now, so I might pose, if I may, another contentious question. And I really appreciate the response that you both gave to that question, because I think it really drives home the importance of being open in times and as much as is possible at providing support for individuals pursuing employment, even if that's just the beginning conversation, that the door is never closed, and that really, unless somebody's not actively looking for work, that opportunity is made available. And even so much as that the opportunity is made available to have a conversation to explore what looking for work would look like. That somebody isn't necessarily interested in it today, but what is it about work that they're not interested in? So more so than the idea of work, a little bit of motivational dialogue, some conversation around the pros and cons of working and of not working. Right? Okay, so the next contentious question follows on the back of a point that Lana made. In terms of job match, not with respect to employability for legal reasons, but more so the idea of work as a means of pursuing recovery, so a piece of the recovery puzzle, if you will, work for the sake of work, in terms of the job not necessarily being somebody's ideal occupation, versus a really, really tight fit with what that person would hope to be doing. So if each panelist could comment on the tension between work as work and work as like ultimate desired job to have. And I'll just sort of reference Joe Maroney, who's a vocational researcher from the University of Oregon in the States, who talks about not working for people is worse for one's mental health, one's general wellness, than is working in a not optimal or stressful working environment. And I know that is a contentious finding, but it's one that exists within literature and is part of our conversation. So perhaps to Chris first, if we keep our alternating, commenting on the difference between ideal job versus work for the sake of work.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a good, certainly a good question. It's one that's come up a few times. Joe is a fantastic guy and never shies away from controversial topics, if anyone's had the pleasure of chatting with him or hearing him speak. But I would tend to agree with him for the most part, and I think that even though in the disability community, we've really put a lot of emphasis into, for example, customized employment and finding that perfect job for somebody, and really putting in the time to do the discovery and make sure that we've identified all the ideal conditions for employment, so that really we're on a much better path to getting a job that is really well suited for people. If you have the opportunity and the means and the ability to do that, I think that's great. However, I do think that there's value for people, and in some cases we've had folks come in, and in particular young people come in who they just might not be ready to have their ideal career yet. They don't even know exactly what that is, because they don't have enough experience to measure that by. They just don't have enough life and work experience to know exactly what that is. And so in those cases, I think that there may be value in talking to them. And we always were very upfront with them about when this was happening, that maybe we want to gain some experience and try out a few different jobs, knowing full well that this may not be the job that they're in for the rest of their life. And that's a very normal thing to happen. How many of us in our own career lives, got our first job and we're still doing that today or 20 years later? In many cases, that's not what happens. We get our first job, and that teaches us what we never want to do again. It teaches us what things are really important to us from our values in a workplace or with an employer, or just an employment, climate, the climate that we work in, where I think that sometimes the people we support also could benefit from having some of those experiences. I think that in my thought is that it's better if we're going to support somebody in that route, just to be very clear and upfront with it right from the start, that even though this might not be your ideal job choice or your dream career, It's something that will get you a paycheck, which could help you to then further some of your other goals, or could help you get out of a situation where you're at now that's putting up barriers for you. So I think if we can be open and honest with people about that, we've had folks that have come back every 3 years and said, okay, that was a great job. I'm ready for the next one. Or I've thought of something newer. Now I want to go and do this. And so I think that can all have value.
That's fantastic, Chris. Thank you. Thoughts from Lana?
I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Chris has just said, and totally endorse the Joe Maroney quote. In terms of persons with mental illness and with drug addiction, and either or both, it's particularly important to get people working right away. People that are working have less hospitalizations. People that are working report higher satisfaction with life and score better on any kind of wellness indicator that you want to use. People that are working also have lower suicide risk indexes. And so on any kinds of these wellness kinds of measures that you want to use, work is a protective factor. Oh, I disappeared again on the screen.
I have a little screensaver that's popping up.
So for those reasons, the any job versus dream job is important. Also, the learning that comes from just getting going with work. We know that vocational maturity, that's something that we talk about, comes from just the very act of working. So while you're working, that doesn't stop you from looking for a different job or contemplating your dream job or moving towards that. And those skills that you get from working. And it's interesting, I was listening to actually Chris's webinar from the other day, and he was, or from last time, and he was talking about what employers think about and what employees think about, and the excuse that kids give about my cell phone battery died, and these kinds of things. You get that from actually working. And so getting a job and getting going and learning some of those skills in a job that's not as important to you is really important, because then when you do get that dream job or that job that matters more, you're going to be able to retain that job because you have those skills. So, I mean, I could go on forever because there's a plethora of reasons why it's just so important to get somebody working and just get them going, and then continue to feed that hope and to develop those strengths and to learn more about what's important for them. And then if they want to quit and find something else, or find something else and then quit, get going with that.
Fantastic. And I think that is a wonderful place to close today's session. I want to thank both our presenters today, Lana and Chris. Thank you so much for your generous donation of your time and your expertise. We do have a quick comment from Samantha, who'd like to connect a little bit more, perhaps with Lana, around addictions supports. And so, Samantha, if I could just ask you to email me at the PSR AP website, my email address, I can then connect you further to Lana for that. Thank you to everybody who showed today. It was a really great conversation. I appreciate all the questions coming in. I know it was a great way to take the information that we had through our rich 5 preceding sessions, integrate it, and sort of dig a little deeper into the topics that we didn't get to talk about as much, with some specific contextual examples from your practice and personal experience. So thank you, everybody. We're going to close for now. Just a reminder that we have our final session of the spring season, I guess, coming up on May 27th with Jen Cusick from Luminate Wellness, which is on becoming a radical advocate for self-determination. And that session is almost full, so I'd encourage you, if you haven't registered and you want to attend, to visit scirehab.ca and sign up for that webinar. All the very best, and we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks.